Welcome to the John Adams. My name is Tracy Metz, and I'm the director of the one and only independent nonprofit that brings the best and the brightest of American thinking to the Netherlands. We're here this evening to talk about the runoffs that were held yesterday in the state of Georgia for two contested seats in the Senate. Raphael Warnock, a Democrat and a Baptist preacher, has made history. He will be the first black senator from Georgia. The other race is still in progress. John Ossoff has a very small lead over David Perdue, but it's still too close to call. The John Adams is very happy to welcome today two eminent political figures, Jonathan Capehart, a Democrat, and Michael Steele, a Republican. Jonathan Capehart is a well-known commentator for the Washington Post and PBS and has his own weekend show on MSNBC. He was in Amsterdam in 2018 as our speaker at an event together with the Fulbright Center on the midterm elections. Michael Steele was the first African-American chairman of the Republican National Committee, and he is now a senior advisor to the anti-Trump Lincoln Project. And in these times, it is worth mentioning that these two men are friends. That is still possible. We are delighted to have as our moderator this evening the America expert Laila Frank. She has been in Georgia for the past 2 weeks and has followed the run-up to the runoffs from up close. In a tweet about this evening's event, Michael Steele said, "Bring popcorn. It'll be a hoot." Well, I'm glad he thinks so, because actually I think most of us are still biting our nails. There may be a recount in the offing. And as we speak, Congress is in session to ratify the outcome of the November 3rd elections and to confirm Joe Biden as president, although there has been a revolt of senators and members of the House announced. And also, as we speak, protesters fill the streets of Washington and representatives have been evacuated from their offices. So it's not over yet, people. That's what we're going to talk about this evening. Send us our questions. I'll be waiting for you to pass them on to our moderator and to our guests. And it's over to you, Laila.
Thank you, Tracy. And thank you so much, Michael and Jonathan, for spending some time today with us. I know you're very busy. Welcome to both of you. We're supposed to talk about Georgia, and yes, we will, but I think we should start with the current events in Washington. We cannot pass that by. And Jonathan, I think you are in Washington right now. Can you tell us the latest? Where are we at? What's happening?
Well, a lot's been happening in Washington. The president had been advertising for a while now, telling people to come to Washington on January 6th, when both chambers of Congress were to meet for the sole purpose of certifying the electoral vote. An event that was so routine, so pro forma in elections past that it came and went without notice, but not this time. Earlier in the day, I was in downtown Washington near the Capitol as buses were arriving and unloading hundreds of pro-Trump protesters making their way to the Capitol. Before this event started, President Trump addressed a lot of the protesters who were on the ellipse, which is south of the White House. He spoke for a long time, and then he said from that podium that he would march with them to the Capitol. After his speech, he went back to the White House, but a lot of those people marched their way to the Capitol. And as you, Laila, just reported, the Cannon House office building has been evacuated. One of the buildings of the Library of Congress has been evacuated, according to to a Library of Congress source of mine. I got that confirmed. And also, at least one of the television networks is showing the protesters at the Capitol. There are lots of tweets with video out there of protesters doing battle with Capitol Hill police at the foot of the Capitol, on the west front of the Capitol, in the shadow of the inauguration platform, which is already constructed, where in 14 days, President-elect Joe Biden will put his hand on the Bible and be sworn in as president of the United States. At least that is the plan.
Yeah. And earlier this day, Rudy Giuliani also called for what he called trial by combat, which is basically what we're seeing right now. Michael, where is this heading today? Is there actually going to be a joint session? And will the electoral counts be... What's the end game here for today?
Well, the number one, it was great to be with everybody. Thank you, first of all, to be a part of this discussion. So first, yes, the Senate and the House are meeting in joint session to count the electoral college ballots. That's all they're there to do, just a roll call of the states. And this is the number of electoral votes that Vice President Biden got. These are the number of votes that Donald Trump got. But the back drama is what the president intended and what the president wanted, which was started and played out in the state of Georgia, where he was heard on an extensive conference call directing the Secretary of State, Raffensperger, to find 11,780 votes for him to turn back the electoral outcome of that state, thereby disenfranchising the voters of that state who voted for his opponent. Then you also have the narrative where the president tried to instruct the vice president, who is the president of the Senate, who is overseeing today's electoral college count, to do the right thing, as the president said, which meant that at the appropriate time, refused to accept those electoral ballots from the states of Pennsylvania, Georgia, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Arizona, and essentially declare him the winner of the election, which the vice president, under our Constitution, does not have the authority to do. Once the objection was raised at counting the ballots from Arizona by Ted Cruz and others who signed the appropriate documents objecting, they've now retreated to their respective chambers in the House or Senate to have a 2-hour debate. It looks to happen each time one of these states comes up, Michigan, Pennsylvania, for example, this objection will be raised. So this could ensue some 10 to 12 hours of debate in both chambers, which may push this process, which normally, Jonathan, takes about 2 hours in the normal course of things to go through the pro forma approach here, will probably take the rest of the day and tomorrow.
Right.
It's an unfortunate occurrence for our country. It is not just illiberal. It is unconstitutional in some respects, what the president is seeking to have done. And we are now watching it unfold real time here in the nation's capital as protesters are on the street backing a president who legitimately lost his reelection.
Yes, we will be following the news. If there's any breaking news, Tracy will enlighten us, and we'll wheel that into the conversation. I think for now we'll just keep an eye on it. Thank you for elaborating on what's going on there, and let's step a little bit back and look at the other thing that's going on right now, which is the runoffs, the Georgia runoffs. I just got back from the campaign trail, mostly the conservative campaign trail, and it was fun, I have to tell you. I mean, there was some old school romance for a local race, Saturday mornings at a farm, Sunday mornings at church, all the rallies going on, although it was obviously not a local race, it was a national race. And there were money, attention frames, and stakes. It was all national. A couple of things that really stood out to me. First of all, the really deeply felt betrayal by Republicans or by voters, Trump voters mostly, who really do believe that something has been wrong. And it's one thing to read the numbers and see that an X amount of Americans don't believe these were fair elections. It's a very different thing if people tell you with almost tears in their eyes, and I'm talking highly educated, no educated, all kinds of people who really truly believe, deeply feel that something has been wrong. And that, no matter what's going to happen today, and the president, Donald Trump, will not be there in 2 more weeks, these people will still be there, and the disbelief and the distrust will still be there. And I thought that was, it made a real impression. The second thing was, I saw a conservative movement, like all the rock stars were there. Everybody on the conservative train, everybody on the Trump train. They were in Georgia, they were campaigning. And it was a pretty strong movement that can actually thank the president for growing and flourishing. And they would easily, happily say goodbye to him, and they would flourish and it would be all right. But now they've turned out to be very bendy and flexible in pursuit of power. There's been some very flexible oral arguments saying we're going to vote in such big numbers that they can't cheat us, which is a very interesting divide. And I guess the divide in the Republican Party is one that we're seeing being played out right now, and that's one that's going to be huge, and we're going to talk about that too. There's one other thing that really stood out to me from the Democratic side, and that is the fact that the real work was done by grassroots organizations, by Stacey Abrams, but by many, many, many more. And that the political culture of getting in during campaigns, asking for a vote, moving out, and moving back in after a couple of years when there's elections again and using the same voter files is not the way to win elections. And I'm curious to hear your thoughts also on what is it that the Democratic Party actually did in Georgia? Because I feel that the real work was done by the grassroots and not by the party, and they need to find a way to keep that together.
Quick
Tracy.
update before we continue.
Yeah.
Capitol Police are now firing tear gas into the crowd. The U.S. Capitol now on lockdown, and that's, I'm sure, a different lockdown from the Corona lockdown.
Okay, so we're going downhill.
Georgia.
Georgia, we're getting back to Georgia. So a couple of observations. I was wondering, for you guys, what are your big takeaways? Michael, let me start with you. What does the outcome of the race so far tell you?
It tells me how the Republican Party allowed itself to get sidelined by the musings of one individual. They abandoned all the things that they would normally do in a situation like this, in a special election in a state that is a red state. Georgia is a Republican state. I mean, yeah, Atlanta and various counties may have very large Democratic populations, electoral populations, but the state is a red state. Special elections typically go Republicans' way. Out of 8 special elections going back to 1988, the Democrats only won 1, and the one that they won, the winner, the Democrat who won, immediately switched and became a Republican. So there's the history there. So going into this, when the president set up this process by telling voters, Republican voters, to not trust it, what did you think the outcome would be? How did you think this was going to turn out if you're telling voters that not only did the process that I was in running for the presidency corrupt, meaning mail-in ballots, vote by mail, absentee ballots were not a legitimate form of voting, which is how we win elections in America, which is how Republicans have won elections, certainly during my time as national chairman, that system is corrupt. Now you're going to go into a special election and tell them what? Oh, now you can trust it? Now it's okay? So the mixed messaging, the sort of desensitizing the importance of this to his base. Whenever the president would talk about this election, this special election, he talked rarely about the 2 Republican senatorial candidates, Senator Perdue and Senator Loeffler. He would wax on about what happened to him. And it wasn't until he showed up literally the day before the election that he threw them a bone and gave them some time and talked about them. Well, that was too late. And we saw that in the results last evening when you looked at the turnout that was down in some key critical aspects of counties down 15, 17, 20%. In one county, 27%, less turnout. So yeah, that's how this played itself out. And the result is you lose a state that you would win for the presidency. You lose 2 Senate seats that you absolutely needed to control and maintain the majority as a new Democratic administration is coming into existence.
Mm-hmm. What about you, Jonathan? What do you take away from the outcome so far?
Well, first of all, I'm so intent on answering I was so intent on answering your first question that I completely forgot to say thank you for having me be here. It's great to be back with the John Adams Institute. It's great to see Tracy again. I can't believe that was 2018 when I was in Amsterdam, and am dying to get back so I can actually see the beautiful city. But to answer your question, Georgia was surprising, and surprising in a good way. The fact that now Reverend Raphael Warnock has been declared the winner. John Ossoff is either hours or days away from potentially being declared the winner of the second seat. To have an African American and a Jewish American, both native Georgians, both being elected to the Senate and making history in their own right is spectacular. It truly is. It's historic. It's spectacular. It is a wonderful thing. How they got there, Laila, to your earlier point about the grassroots, absolutely. The grassroots were important in those victories, not in the Warnock victory, in the potential Ossoff victory, certainly in the Joe Biden victory. Everyone was looking to Texas as the place that Democrats would finally flip, but it was Georgia. And as much as we want to put the praise on all the grassroots groups out there that got people out to vote, you cannot underestimate or undervalue the impact of Stacey Abrams on that grassroots movement. Yeah. Because it was her campaign for governor in 2018 where, had it not been for voter suppression that, purged a lot of people from the polls, she very well might have been governor right now. Yeah. But instead, she turned that defeat into action and set about registering. I think it was the goal was 800,000 unregistered but eligible voters. And the
Jonathan,
other thing to keep in mind.
I'm gonna, because you're right on point, and we have a video to illustrate that. So I want our viewers to have a look at that, and then we'll continue our discussion. Het is video nummer 8. There we go.
Democracy is not a permanent state. It has to be maintained. It has to be defended. Those communities that have the most to gain by participation are the most likely to change who has power.
I think.
So, if I may, Laila, Michael, Jonathan, why is Stacey Abrams not running for one of the Senate seats?
Well, she was asked. A lot of people wanted her to run for the Senate for first the Johnny Isakson seat that came available that Kelly Loeffler was appointed to. And then when the Purdue seat came open, they wanted her to run for that too. I might have that wrong, Chairman Steele, but correct me if I'm wrong.
Yep.
But they wanted her to run, and she said no.
Oh.
She didn't want to run for Senate. Part of the calculation might have been that she could have been chosen to be on the ticket with the Democratic presidential nominee, and she made no secret that was something she would be very interested in. But a run for governor very well could be in her future in 2022. Yeah. She very well might run for governor. I've interviewed Stacey Abrams. I've interviewed Reverend Warnock and John Ossoff, and through this entire time, they were talking about quote unquote movement energy that they were seeing on the ground. Now, when you talk to a candidate running for office, you become used to hearing them putting the best face on the campaign that they're running, especially when the campaign that they are running is one that, at least because of history, is doomed. Warnock and Ossoff, if past as prologue, should not have won their elections. No. The whole runoff system as it was set up in Georgia was set up for the sole purpose of diluting the electoral power of African Americans in the state. And so the fact that Stacey Abrams and all of the organizations that followed her lead and her template in Georgia were able to overcome a system that was meant to basically stop the power of their vote, speaks to the power of what just happened, but it also speaks to the power of what Stacey Abrams has been preaching to the Democratic Party since before she ran for governor. And that was, one, stop running away from being a Democrat. Own it. People want authenticity, and for too long, Democrats had been running as Republican light. And people could suss it out. Why vote for a faux Republican when you can vote for the real Republican, which is what they did. The other thing that she pushed the party to do and pushed activists to do is to engage with the Black community consistently, or actually not just the Black community, but with non-voters, with the electorate. Don't just, I think, Laila, as you said, don't just swoop in at election time and then leave and not come back. Her whole focus since before running for governor, while running for governor, after running for governor, and through the presidential, the Senate races, the runoffs, has always been about staying engaged with the electorate and giving the electorate a reason to not vote against someone, but to vote for your candidates and for their interests. And I think that the Stacey Abrams template, that model, is going to be replicated in other places. And one last thing, you were asking the question about the Democratic Party and where's the Democratic Party?
Jonathan, Tracy wants to interrupt because something's going on. There's news.
Yeah.
Sorry to say.
Listen to this, Steele.
Yeah.
Protesters have breached the Capitol and are now outside the Senate chamber.
And also, from what I've been told, live on MSNBC, Mike Pence was evacuated from the Senate.
So what does this mean, Michael? We'll get back to Georgia and Stacey Abrams, but I have to ask, Michael, what does this mean for the joint session that Michael Pence has been evacuated?
It's a very dangerous moment for our country right now. Yeah. These people have no respect for the rule of law. Now the riot, the Capitol Hill riot police are coming on the scene. This is going to turn ugly very quickly, but I think people need to understand this is what they want. This is what they want. They want this drama. They want the danger that
Can you define they for us? Who is they?
The Trump supporters, the folks you see protesting, Donald Trump himself. This is on him. This is on Senator Ted Cruz. This is on Senator Josh Hawley. This is on the 13 Republican senators who said that they're going to, vote against the Electoral College process. This is on the 126 Republican members of the House who signed on to a bogus lawsuit in the state of Texas that jump-started a lot of this. So the responsibility is on the elected officials who now see these individuals all over the Capitol steps. And let us be very clear here. The scene that we see unfolding in Washington where you have people now draped all over the Capitol building, breaching the Capitol itself. If that had been Black Lives Matter protesters, these same idiots would unleash unholy hell in terms of their rhetoric about how un-American this is and how insignificant or significant these actions are, and how we must stand up and the rule of law must prevail. Yeah. They are themselves breaking the very rules and the very laws that they claim that they uphold. So I think it's important that we understand the context of what this is all about and how the racial elements underneath this still permeate the actions that we see taking place right now.
So, Michael, what is the response from the rest of the Republican Party? Because there's so much energy going into the Trump part of it, and they're claiming it. But what is left of the Republican Party, and what should be the proper response right now?
This, for me, is the Republican leadership sealing itself inside the tomb, the burial tomb that Donald Trump has built for them. There is no way back from this. And God forbid a life is harmed in some way, someone's injured or property is damaged because of this. This is on the heads of every Republican leader who failed to stand up.
But there might be no way. Sorry to interrupt you, Michael, but there might not be a way back. But what's the way forward is the question.
There is no. How do you go forward when the country's watching what your party is sanctioning? What do you say to them after this? What words do you use? You know, this starts with a party that puts children in cages, and now ends with that same party storming the Capitol.
How can you still be a Republican, Michael?
Pardon me?
How can you still be a Republican?
Hey, after this is Jonathan, you and I made the talk, baby. I need to come on your podcast.
Yes, Tracy, I ask Michael Steele this question every time he comes on my podcast, every time he comes on my television show. And each time he says, oh, yeah, I'm still a Republican. And I think this might be an exact quote. I'll be damned if I let these people run me out of my party.
And that's true. And that's where I believe that very fervently, which is why I still stand where I stand and why I fight the way I do, because this is not republicanism and this is not conservatism. This has nothing to do with any of that. This is about satisfying the maniacal longings of one man and projecting onto him whatever, fake, pain that you may have because, this happened to you or that happened to you. That's not what the American spirit has been about. The American spirit has been about resilience. I mean, you've got these folks complaining about the fact that Donald Trump lost an election. What about George Floyd, who lost his life?
Well, if we're going to talk about resilience and Georgia, I think there has been resilience from the governor, from Kemp, from Ravensburger. I mean, they stood up to Donald Trump. And so it happens. It still does. But my question to you, also getting back to what Jonathan talked about with Stacey Abrams and the grassroots organizing, is what is the Republican version of that? Is there a Republican answer to Stacey Abrams and the outreach to communities and getting a base back into the field?
Black unemployment is the lowest it's ever been. that's the outreach. Look, the reality of it is there is nothing comparable under the Trump administration that marries up with what we saw not just Stacey Abrams, but Democrats across the country do. The Democrats were successful in gaining majorities in the House to the point where they could take control of the House. They lost 11 of those seats that they gained. They have to understand why. And I think that goes to the heart of understanding and appreciating where the country is when it comes to some of the prescriptions that Democrats propose. They got, beat up over the idea that they let simmer that they want to defund the police in the country. That is not where the country is. And they paid a price for that at the polls. So the Republicans, my point is the Republicans are good at taking advantage of your missteps. Republicans have not, since I've left running the party, put forward the kind of governing idea, whether you agree or disagree with it. That's the whole point of the political process, is to have that debate, which we did in 2010 around healthcare, for example. But we're not in a position, we've not put forth a governing principle that could unify the party. What you saw in 2016 was Trump playing to the lowest common denominator that animates a populace that's restless and that's frustrated and that in some regards is angry. But there is nothing that's uplifting about that. And so when you get into a crisis moment, as we've seen with COVID-19, for example, all of a sudden, all of that sheds away because fear takes over. And that fear is a legitimate fear, not about, oh, gee, whether or not you're going to take my guns from me. But the fear becomes whether or not my grandparents will survive, whether or not my family will become infected, whether or not I will lose my business. And if you don't have a response to that, you lose an election. And that's what just happened in America.
Right. We're going to show a video of Kim Klejcik. You guys know the video, I think. Just to give an example of a way that the Republican Party is trying to reach a certain group of black voters. It is video nummer 9.
I'm Kim Klejcik. This is Baltimore, the real Baltimore. This is the reality for black people every single day. Crumbling infrastructure, abandoned homes, poverty, and crime. Baltimore has been run by the Democrat Party for 53 years. What is the result of their decades of leadership? Baltimore is one of the top 5 most dangerous cities in America. The murder rate in Baltimore is 10 times the U.S. average. The Baltimore poverty rate is over 20%. Homicide, drug, and alcohol deaths are skyrocketing in our city. Do you believe Black Lives Matter? I do. The vast majority of crime in Baltimore is perpetrated against black people, who make up 60% of the population. So why don't we care about our communities? The Democrat Party have betrayed the black people of Baltimore. If the politicians walk the streets like I do, they would see exactly how their policies and corruption affects us.
Before we get into this, Tracy?
The Senate has gone into recess. The debate has been stopped for
an unknown
period of time.
Okay. So for now, the president got what he wanted. Okay. All right. It must be a very scary moment for everybody, but especially for you guys right now.
Keep going.
It is a it's a terrible moment. I mean, to Chairman Steele's point, 7 months ago, we watched protests, racial justice protests in cities all across the United States, also here in Washington, where we saw the full force of law enforcement used against people peacefully protesting the killing of an unarmed African-American man. Tear gas, rubber bullets, here in Washington, military helicopters, military law enforcement being employed. And here in the nation's capital, where one of the solemn, if not routine and perfunctory ceremonies that is supposed to be about safeguarding the peaceful transfer of power from one administration to another is literally under assault right now. And not just in rhetoric, but with people. I've been watching people storming the Capitol, walking the halls of the United States Capitol with their Trump flags and American flags and Don't Tread on Me flags. These being the same people who were yelling at Black Lives Matter protesters because they, quote unquote, don't respect the police or don't have any care for law enforcement. And these are the same people who are now storming one of the branches of government.
Yeah, it feels a little...
The Speaker of the House and the Senate Majority Leader and the Vice President of the United States had to be evacuated.
Yeah.
This is unconscionable.
Yeah, and it's all
I can only
happening.
imagine what people in Holland and around the world must be thinking when they look at pictures from the United States that were once unfathomable.
I mean, it's all happening right now. I think everybody is watching something unprecedented and being shocked by it, truly, also out here. And that's also why it feels a little out of tune to talk about the Georgia races, who were only yesterday, but still so much happening and so important while this is going on. Yet we are going to do it. Because it also matters and it's important, and there's nothing we can do right now about everything that's going on outside, but we can try to make sense of what's happening in the country and what happened with the races. You just mentioned the Black Lives Matter protests, Jonathan, and before that we were actually watching a clip from a candidate in Baltimore who lost her elections, but why we wanted to show it was as maybe sort of a response to the enormous outreach that the Democratic Party has done to black voters, especially in Georgia. But there has also been an outreach from the Trump campaign to black voters, from Congress members such as Kim Klacik. She didn't win, but Trump did win part of the black vote back. There's been an outreach to Latin voters. So my question to you, Michael, is this the way to go? And is this indeed an answer to the huge outreach that Democrats have been doing?
No, because that video is a lie. That video is not Baltimore. I could take you to any city in America that has a boarded up building or a neighborhood that's in distress. And there are a whole lot of white places. White folks live there.
Sure, I agree with you on that. But you also
my point is, it's important because you can't just sort of project out here that this is a reflection of the black community, number one, right, and that getting a black woman walking through in high heels, by the way,
right,
on city streets, in a nice little slender skirt, is somehow going to translate a narrative to the black community that you should vote for us.
Okay, but
when you're not addressing the criminal justice issues, when you're not addressing the poverty, when you're not addressing the miseducation of those kids in those neighborhoods.
Yeah.
But more broadly speaking, the Republican Party doesn't have a black people problem. It's got a people problem. The country is demographically very different, even in the 10 years since I was national chairman. And if you don't account for that in authentic ways, you're not going to win elections. And if you're not win elections, the answer is not going to be what we see happening right now in the nation's capital, because you don't like the outcome because you were too lazy to actually do the work to win the vote. Instead, you're going to protest and declare you won anyway. That's not the result. And so, you picked up some black vote, but you still didn't do better than George Bush, who got 12% of the black vote in 2004 in his last election. So the reality of it is we got to be honest about what it is and what it isn't. And what it isn't is what you showed. Mm-hmm. That's not going to spark a combination in the black neighborhood to think seriously about being a part of or joining the Republican Party.
But isn't there, just to push back on it a little bit, of course, the high heels and the dress and the form of it, okay, so far. But isn't there a sense of, in part of the black community, also a sense of discomfort with what has been given to them in America? And isn't that what part of the Trump party has been trying to tap into?
But what did they step into? How did they address that? Opportunity zones were created, but they were largely benefited white-owned businesses. So, criminal justice reform, that was a good thing. But then something like, police shootings, which is critically important, comes up and they're silent. So don't do the things you think you need to do for us. do the things we want you to do for us. And then we can have a conversation. That is not what's happening. And Black folks will tell you, and we saw in this election, on the Democratic side, they've had enough as well, because they recognize at the end of the day, this has got to be about what we want, not what Joe Biden wants, or not what Donald Trump wants, or not what the political establishment wants, but what we want. So there's a lot more involved here than just doing let's put out a commercial, or let's get up and give a speech where we'll make some pronouncements about what we're going to do for the Black community.
Yeah. Thank you for that. We are gonna look at another video, and that's gonna be one of yours, Michael. As I can say, it's number 3.
Imagine that night, tensions high, a nation torn apart, a plot here in Baltimore City to assassinate a newly elected president on his way to inauguration, and to plunge the country into chaos. Abraham Lincoln disembarked at this train station and under pre-dawn skies made his way unscathed and on to greatness. In the days ahead, we may face a crisis of similar proportion, an outlaw president clinging to power and defying the will of the people. For 4 years, many have said there will come a moment. Well, this is the moment, because this ballot is like none ever cast. Now, I'm a lifelong Republican, and I'm still a Republican. But this ballot is how we restore the soul of our nation, electing a good man, Joe Biden, and a trailblazer, Kamala Harris, and ensure an orderly transfer of power. Or plunge our country into chaos. America or Trump? I choose America.
The Lincoln Project is responsible for the content of this advertising.
Tracy?
I asked to see this video, Michael, because there's been a lot of criticism of the Lincoln Project, which is brilliant in its social media, but also criticism of its hard approach, non-constructive. And if you say, we want to get out there, we need the things that we want, not that others think that we need. Is the Lincoln Project been helpful in creating a path forward after these elections?
Absolutely, I believe so, because someone had to stand up. Our elected leaders weren't standing up to Trumpism. Who stood up? Who in the Republican Party stood up? You're talking about a group of men and women who, like me, are still Republicans, some of whom have left the party, but still have and hold those conservative values and ideals that help shape them. When they saw that nobody was standing up for those values and those ideas, which is why I wanted to drive home the point that we would be faced with a rogue president clinging to power. Hello, welcome to what we've been talking about, what's going on in Washington right now, who doesn't accept the results of the election. That's what that was about. So you had to make a choice whether this was about the country or Donald Trump.
There's also been a lot of criticism that you were preaching to the choir, or basically preaching to Democrats, and have spent a lot of money doing so, with the beautiful ads, by the way, of the Lincoln Project. But there's been criticism that they were not getting the people in you needed, but were catering to the people who felt that way already. Jonathan, do you feel that's fair?
I completely disagree with the first set of criticisms that Tracy articulated and the ones that you're articulating. The Lincoln Project, thank God for it, because you had Republicans talking to Republicans in the bare-knuckled way that Republicans talk about politics. What the Lincoln Project did, and one of the reasons why it was so popular among lots of Democrats, is that it was taking bare-knuckled Republican electoral campaigning and turning it into and using it not on behalf of a specific Democratic candidate. They trained their eye and their ire and their firepower, rhetorical and commercial firepower, on the sitting Republican president of the United States. And it worked and it hurt, because they knew how to talk about him in ways that Republicans could hear it.
And not just
the diehard, hold on, not the diehard 35, 38% of the president's diehard base, not them.
Right.
The Republicans like Michael Steele, who are still Republicans, not Democrats. Keep that in mind. These are not Democrats unless they've specifically left the Republican Party and went to the Democratic Party, which some did. That you have Republicans who don't like Trump, don't like what he represents, don't like what he's done to the country, and were desperate for someone within their party with guts to stand up to him. And no one would. Until Lincoln Project came and gave them a voice and gave them somewhere to go. Whatever these criticisms are, I don't know where they're coming from, but they are a bit off base and out of place.
Okay, well, let's look at one of the ads that was aired in Georgia then, to give our people an idea. It is nummer 5, alsjeblieft.
John Ossoff and Raphael Warnock are running to serve Georgia in the Senate. So you might think this ad is about Kelly Loeffler and David Perdue. Sure, they both received secret COVID briefings while their stockbrokers cashed in. Yeah, they both embraced the crazy conspiracy nuts. But Loeffler and Perdue aren't really on the ballot. No, John Ossoff and Raphael Warnock are really running against Mitch McConnell. If Mitch elects his pet senators, it's 4 more years of what we just voted out. McConnell will block COVID relief for Georgians, stop Joe Biden from appointing qualified doctors and scientists to fight this pandemic. Loeffler and Perdue will vote with McConnell every time, no matter how much it hurts Georgia. No, you won't see McConnell's name on the ballot, but he's there.
The Lincoln Project is responsible for the content of this advertising.
So this is one of the ads that goes viral every time. Michael, is this going to be the future of the Lincoln Project? Because first it was aimed at the presidentials, and now there was Georgia. Where are you going with the project?
Well, yeah, it's a good question. There's discussion right now and looking at how this effort can be cemented into the national narrative to hold accountable those men and women who want to run for office, who bring illiberal ideas and behaviors to the table, who try to seek ways to undermine constitutional norms and principles, who look to deconstruct the administrative state, as Donald Trump pledged he would do and clearly has had success at doing. So I don't see Lincoln Project going away anytime soon. I see it serving a legitimate purpose in holding accountable elected officials and others when they falter and when they fail to uphold their oaths of office and their duty of service to the community and to the country. So we'll see how that manifests itself. That's a legitimate question to sort of, peel into a little bit, but I don't know what that is. Because of my other obligations, I'm no longer officially a part of the advisory board. I did my part. I got Trump fired, so I was done in that sense. But the reality of it is the work that's out there that will continue is going to center around these democratic principles and ideas that we see flaunted right now as people. And I get it, legitimate grievances about the election, but this is no way when the process works. This is no way to respond when the process works just because you don't like the outcome. I've lost a lot of elections over my 40 years in American politics where I did not like the outcome, but I never took up arms against my state. I never took up arms against my fellow citizen or my opponent because I didn't like the outcome.
Well,
That's not what we do here.
This is the current situation. Jonathan, do you know if Biden has spoken out or has said anything about the situation at this point?
You mean what's happening in Washington?
Yeah.
Not that I have seen. I don't have my Twitter feed up, so I'm not keeping tabs in that way. I turn around every once in a while to look at the television screen to read what the chyrons are saying.
it was basically the start of a bigger question, which is, this is a given now. There's a big part, what's going on is happening, and there's a big part of the electorate that doesn't trust the outcome. What does the Democratic Party have to do to deal with that in the upcoming 2 weeks, but also once Biden is in office?
That is the $8 gajillion question.
Yeah.
And that was always the question, regardless of what's happened, the horrible things that we're seeing right now. And that was a question simply because even though Joe Biden won the presidency with the most votes of any person having run for president ever in the history of this country, Donald Trump lost, but won 10 million more votes than he won the election, than he earned 4 years ago. Keeping in mind, Hillary Clinton won the popular vote by 4 million votes. He won 10 million more votes than he did in 2016. And so what that signals is there is a significant chunk of this country, more than 70 million people in this country, who, despite hearing him call Mexicans rapists in his presidential campaign announcement speech, despite the Muslim ban, despite Charlottesville, despite separating families at the border and putting babies in jail, and those are just three major things of myriad things he's done as president. Despite all of that, he still won 10 million more votes than he did 4 years ago. So the challenge for the Biden-Harris administration is going to be governing this country through a pandemic and an economic collapse, while almost half the country at this point doesn't believe you're legitimate. I don't know. And having a majority in the House that is the slimmest Democratic majority in, if not history, a long time. And then assuming Jon Ossoff is certified the winner of his race, literally a 50-50 split in the Senate, but the Democrats will be in the majority because the Vice President of the United States is the tie-breaking vote. So that is a hard way to govern.
Yes. Michael,
under normal circumstances.
And what is the challenge for the Republican Party? Let's say Joe Biden gets to be president, and in 2 weeks things are a little. Sorry?
He will be president.
He will be president. But Michael,
not a question of if he will. He will be.
I'm sorry. Things are so off the charts right now. Yes, he will be president, obviously. But Michael, what is going to be the biggest challenge for the Republican Party then?
The biggest challenge is going to be to overcome what the country's seeing right now. This is happening because Josh Hawley made it happen. Ted Cruz made it happen.
And they were all elected. I mean...
Right. They're all elected. So they have to account for it. And the way they will account for it, we'll see whether or not the people will hold them accountable. But in the meantime, to your question, the challenge is going to be, how do you deal with a private citizen, Donald Trump, with a Twitter account and trying to create a media empire, wanting to hold control and sway over the RNC?
Because is that, sorry to interrupt you, but is that really what he's going to do? Or is that still up in the air and nobody really knows?
Hello? Donald Trump has been telegraphing that for 5 years. What are you talking about? I mean, this isn't something new made up. Donald Trump ran for president to establish a media company. That's what he did. He and Roger Ailes were plotting Ailes was under pressure at Fox because they were about to expose what he was doing there. He had cut a side deal to go with Donald Trump to create Trump Media. Trump just himself in the phone call, the now infamous phone call with the Secretary of State of Georgia, where he tried to get him to find 11,780 votes, when he was pressed about what this was and how this was playing out, made it very clear. No, this is Trump Media.
He did.
So This, on the back end of this, Donald Trump is not going away. I say this not just to America, but to the world. He's not going away. You're going to have to deal with him in some form or fashion. We do here in America, but we don't know what his reach is going to be. We don't know how he plans to use whatever media platform he has in the future. But that's part of the reality for the GOP that you can't lose sight of, because those folks who are storming the Capitol right now, they're still going to continue to be stoked. They're going to be fed by him every day. He's going to do rallies. I've said this on air. I've said this on Jonathan's program at one point, that do not be surprised if he tries to set up a shadow administration.
Is he going to run again?
No. That he will not do. That's the canard. He says it for one purpose, to hold in place the ambitions of all those that think they're going to succeed him.
Right.
He wants to handpick who that will be. Maybe his son, Don Jr.
He wants to be
know the
kingmaker.
talk is serious and real about running his daughter, Ivanka, against Marco Rubio in Florida. So this man does not have plans to go quietly into that good night and paint pictures like former President Bush or build houses like former President Carter. He is going to be a menacing political player for the foreseeable future.
Tracy.
Sorry to say, breaking news from Washington. On the floor of the House, House members have been handed gas masks, and the mayor of Washington has announced a curfew in the city.
Okay.
Thank you, Donald Trump.
Yeah.
Yeah. I sort of feel that maybe, is there anything we haven't mentioned or touched upon right now in this strange moment in time that you feel is important to share?
Questions.
Oh, do we have questions?
We do.
Oh, we do. I wasn't aware. Let's throw in the questions then.
We have a question from someone whose name I can't read because it's someone from China.
Okay, awesome.
Who is listening along with us, saying that the black vote has saved American democracy. Does that mean that the police killings of black people will now stop?
Sorry.
Interesting logic.
Optimistic voice from China.
We're laughing not because at the question, but just the hopeful notion that that is in it. I mean, would that were so? No. The short and simple answer is no. But I do think the fact that the black vote not only saved Joe Biden's candidacy in South Carolina, put him on the path to the nomination after Super Tuesday, won him the presidency by turning out in droves in states like Georgia, which flipped from red to blue, and having him as president, as the Democratic nominee, picking Kamala Harris, making her the first black person to be nominated for vice president, and now will be the next vice president, and also making it plain that he is going to have an administration that looks like America, but also embodies the priorities of that America. And then on top of all of that, what is happening in Georgia right now between Warnock being the declared winner and Ossoff this close to being declared the winner, that is because, as we started out this conversation, because of the black vote. And so what I think is going to happen going forward, black Americans seeing, maybe some for the first time, the power of their vote, not just in electing presidents, but in saving a candidate, pushing a candidate, getting that candidate to listen to them and do things that they want to do, and then having those votes make history in a state like Georgia. And so I look forward to seeing what the black electorate does now that it sees and I hope fully embodies the electoral power that they have, that they probably didn't really fully appreciate during the 8 years of Barack Obama. And we know that they didn't really appreciate it because in 2010 and in 2010 and 2014, they didn't show up at the midterms, but they did in 2018, and they did in 2020.
Can I jump on that real quick? Because I think that answer that Jonathan gave goes back to an earlier conversation, part of the conversation when we were talking about the efforts of Stacey Abrams and how that played out. The hard, cold reality of politics is you can't be one and done. That's not how the game is played, and that's certainly not how you change anything. So yeah, everybody patting themselves and applauding the work that Stacey did to get them to 2020, But to Jonathan's point, they weren't there in 2018 for her, all right? And so the question now becomes, who will be there in 2022 and in 2024? How does that work? Does this sustain itself and grow, to Jonathan's point, where Black voters, for example, recognize and appreciate in an affirmative way the full extent of the power of their vote, and no longer find themselves succumbing to the idea that my vote doesn't matter, or taking at face value efforts to suppress that vote in the guise of some, it's just a minor change to the election code, you know? So I think this is going to be the next big test in upcoming elections, to see whether or not, to the point that, well, this could be a model in other states, what Stacey has done. Let's see if other states take on that model and try to implement some of those changes. But more importantly, whether or not that effort is sustained by the Black voter going forward.
Right. Were there more questions?
There are indeed. One of the questions is for Michael. What are your thoughts about the potential breakup of the GOP that we've been seeing come by?
Let's break it up, baby. It's cracking itself. All right, let's salvage the good parts, and then let's try to redo this idea. Republicanism is a 170-year-old proposition, almost 170-year-old idea in our nation's history out of its 244 years. And so you don't just walk away from it that easily. The Whig Party out of which we were born wasn't around that long. And so there is this idea of sustaining those grounding principles, those sort of Lincoln-esque ideas of individual rights and liberties and freedoms grounded by the Constitution. But we're going to have to work to redo that. We're going to have to work hard to reaffirm those in this current form of the party. And
we have a question here, Michael, which in this same vein, Henri Melton wonders if this is the moment that there could finally be a viable third party in the U.S. Mm-hmm.
Well, funny you should ask that question, because I was just on a number of calls today having those kinds of conversations. The reality of it is that is a very difficult thing in our political system to do. We're not like a lot of our European capitals. We're in a lot of European capitals where our friends have a parliamentary system where political ideologies can form rather quickly, relatively speaking, and coalesce out of movements to create political parties, if you will. Our structure and our infrastructure is designed to not allow that to happen. It is very hard to get on the ballot as a third party because you have to do it 57 times. Meaning the 50 states plus the 7 territories. It's not a one and done thing where you sign up once and you're on every ballot in the union.
Well, you might enjoy knowing that in the upcoming Dutch elections in mid-March, we go completely the other direction. We have more than 80 parties that you can choose from.
Yes, you do.
Hey,
yes, you do.
That's choice.
But Michael, I mean, it's hard, obviously, maybe even near to impossible. But if ever, I mean, is it ever going to happen? Because it's also kind of old school.
Yeah, no, I think I love the way you framed that. Yeah, I think it can happen, and I think it will happen, and I think more importantly, it should happen. I think there is a sort of a universality to the idea that regardless of where I fall on the political spectrum, I can find a home. And I think that's important. I think that's important for the longevity of this fledgling republic. We're not this monolithic sort of structure. We're 50 independent states that align themselves under the flag, that idea of e pluribus unum, out of many states, one nation. But we are still many states, and we've seen many of those states from time to time talk about succeeding from that great union.
Jonathan,
but yeah,
do you think,
there is light at the end of that, I think, but we have to work towards it and we have to want it. And I think that's really the challenge that we face in the immediate future.
Jonathan, you think it's going to be a real option, a third party?
It's not in the near future. I just don't see it. I think Michael Steele and other Republicans stand a better chance of slowly reconstituting their party than, starting from scratch with a brand new party.
Yeah. I think with that, if there are no further questions,
then I will thank our speakers and do some concluding remarks.
I think that'd be
okay. Well, gentlemen, I can't thank you enough. Your appearance here was wonderful with regards to content and also very timely, now that the eyes of the world truly are on the U.S. and how we're going to finally come out of this crisis and hopefully go into a more peaceful time, less fraught with conflict. I think all Americans and most of the rest of the world hope for that. So thank you very much for joining us. Thank you to our moderator, Laila Frank. And I wanted to tell our viewers that on January 23rd, we have an interesting event about another towering figure of American politics and the civil rights movement. Sam Pollard has made a remarkable movie about Martin Luther King and how the FBI did their very best to bring him down. It's an amazing movie, and we will be having a Q&A with Sam Pollard on the 23rd before the screening of the movie, and we're doing that in collaboration with the Bali here in Amsterdam. Thank you to our viewers for joining us. I'm sure we'll all go straight back to TV and see what the hot events are now in the Capitol, hoping that things will finally come to some sort of tranquility after this and that we can move ahead together in the new year. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Steele, do you see this?
Yeah.